Every investigation begins with a claim. Today's claim is simple. Every thought inside your mind belongs to you. Most people never question that statement. Neither did I, until I started looking for evidence. The strange thing about assumptions is that they don't announce themselves. They quietly become facts. Not because they were proven, because they were never examined. So today, we're going to examine one. Not with opinions, not with theories, with evidence. Before we continue, I'd like you to do one thing. Choose a belief you would defend. Any belief. Don't tell me, just keep it in your mind. We're coming back to it later. Now ask yourself a question. Not whether that belief is true, not whether it's useful. Where did it come from? Can you identify the exact day, the exact conversation, the exact moment it became yours? If you can't, you're about to discover why. This archive is not an argument, it's an investigation. If the evidence supports the claim, we keep it. If it doesn't, we discard it. That's the only rule. So let's begin at the only place every human investigation eventually reaches, the beginning. Every investigation needs a witness. Ours is different. Our first witness cannot speak. It has no opinions, no politics, no religion, no ideology. Only a brain that has just entered the world. A newborn doesn't know what money is. It doesn't know what success means. It doesn't know which language is correct. It doesn't know which people are strangers, or which flags deserve loyalty. Those ideas don't exist yet, not because they're false, because no one has introduced them. Now consider something remarkable. Within just a few years, that same child will laugh at certain jokes, feel embarrassed by certain actions, believe some careers are respectable and others are failures. They'll have favorite foods, favorite words, favorite heroes. They'll fear things they've never experienced and defend ideas they've never investigated. The question is, when did all of that happen? No child remembers the day they learned what success looked like. No child remembers the first moment they absorbed a stereotype. No child remembers the exact second they decided, people like us don't do that. Yet somehow, those ideas took root, quietly, without permission, without announcement. This isn't unusual. It's how every human mind begins. Before we learn to question, we learn to accept. Before we learn to reason, we learn to repeat. And before we develop our own conclusions, we borrow thousands of someone else's. None of this proves that your thoughts aren't your own. Not yet. It proves something much smaller, and much more important. The mind is capable of adopting ideas, long before it becomes capable of examining them. That brings us to our first piece of evidence. A psychologist wanted to know whether adults were really as independent as they believed. His name was Solomon Asch, and what he discovered changed the investigation forever. The year was 1951. A psychologist named Solomon Asch wasn't interested in intelligence. He wasn't interested in memory. He wanted to answer a much simpler question. How much pressure does it take to make an ordinary person doubt their own eyes? His experiment looked almost childish. A participant entered a room with several other people. On a table were two cards. One card showed a single line. The other showed three different lines. The task couldn't have been easier. Choose the line that matched the first one. Almost everyone answered correctly, until something changed. The participant didn't know that everyone else in the room was part of the experiment. Their answers had been planned before the participant even walked in. Round after round, the group deliberately gave the wrong answer. Not once, not twice, again and again. Now imagine you're sitting in that room. You know the correct answer. It's obvious. You can see it. 8 people answer before you. Every one of them confidently chooses the wrong line. Now it's your turn. What do you say? Most people believe they would stand alone. That's what they imagine. The evidence tells a different story. A surprising number of participants abandoned what they could clearly see, simply because everyone else disagreed. Not because they became blind, not because they became less intelligent, because the human mind carries another question beneath every decision. What if I'm the one who's wrong? Read that again. Nothing about the lines changed, only the people around them. Yet for many participants, that was enough. The experiment ended decades ago. The room disappeared. The lines were packed away. But the mechanism never left. It followed us into classrooms, into offices, into families, into elections, into social media, into every place where the crowd quietly whispers, everyone else thinks this. This experiment doesn't prove that crowds always control us. It proves something more uncomfortable. Sometimes, the presence of other minds becomes part of our own thinking, without asking permission. Which raises another question. If complete strangers can influence what you say, what happens when the people influencing you are the ones you trust? Parents, teachers, friends, people you admire, people you love. That question leads us directly to the next piece of evidence. Not about conformity, about imitation. Because long before we learn to agree with others, we learn by becoming them. If the previous evidence showed that people can influence our decisions, the next evidence asks a different question. Can people influence us without ever speaking to us? In the early 1960s, psychologist Albert Bandura invited a group of young children into a room. One by one, they watched an adult interact with a large inflatable toy known as a Bobo doll. But this wasn't ordinary play. The adult shouted at the doll, punched it, kicked it, struck it repeatedly with a toy hammer. Then, the adult quietly left the room. Nothing was explained, no instructions were given, no child was told what to do next. A few minutes later, each child entered a room containing the very same Bobo doll. Now the experiment truly began. Many of the children didn't just play with the doll, they repeated what they had witnessed, the punches, the kicks, even some of the exact words used by the adult. Not because anyone ordered them to, not because they believed it was right, simply because their minds had recorded a pattern. And when the moment arrived, they played it back. Think about that for a moment. The lesson wasn't taught, it was observed, and observation was enough. Now expand that idea. A child doesn't watch one adult, they watch hundreds. Parents, grandparents, teachers, older siblings, television, movies, friends. Every day, thousands of small behaviors are quietly demonstrated. Most disappear, some remain, and the child rarely notices the difference. Years later, that child becomes an adult. Someone compliments them. They respond exactly as a parent once did. Someone criticizes them. They react exactly as a teacher once reacted. Someone raises their voice. Their body prepares for a response before conscious thought has even arrived. Here's the unsettling part. Many of these reactions feel original. They feel like personality, but some may simply be echoes. Echoes repeated so many times, they eventually sound like your own voice. The investigation is changing. We no longer have evidence that other people can influence what we say. We now have evidence that they can influence how we become. And if behavior can be learned by watching, what about beliefs? What about fears? What about confidence? What about identity? The next piece of evidence takes us even deeper, because it suggests your brain may already be making decisions before the version of you that says I even realizes it. So far, the evidence has shown us two things. First, other people can influence what we say. Second, they can influence how we behave. Now the investigation reaches a more difficult question. When does a decision actually begin? At the moment you become aware of it, or before? Imagine this. You're walking through a supermarket. Hundreds of products surround you. After a few minutes, your hand reaches for one particular brand. You place it in your cart. Simple, an ordinary decision. But was it? Most of us tell ourselves a story. I chose it because I preferred it. Maybe that's true. But how did that preference begin? Was it the advertisement you forgot? The logo you've seen thousands of times? The product your parents always bought? Or the fact that it simply looked familiar? Psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying decisions like these. His research revealed something uncomfortable. The brain often reaches conclusions long before we become aware of the reasons. And after the decision is made, the conscious mind quietly builds a story that explains it. Not because it's trying to deceive us, because it wants the world to make sense. Think about how often you've said, I just had a feeling, or something told me not to trust them. Sometimes those instincts are valuable, sometimes they're accurate. But they don't appear from nowhere. They're built from thousands of experiences, most of which you no longer remember. This is why two people can witness the same event and walk away believing completely different things. Not because one is intelligent and the other isn't, but because no two minds carry the same history. Every memory, every lesson, every success, every failure quietly shapes the next decision before the decision even arrives. The investigation has now reached an important point. Your thoughts are not random. They come from somewhere. Some were learned, some were copied, some were rewarded, some were repeated until they felt like truth. But one question still refuses to disappear. If your mind has been shaped by parents, teachers, friends, culture, experience, and even memories you've forgotten, what part of your thinking truly belongs to you? That is the final question this archive must answer. And to answer it, we need to stop looking at where thoughts come from and start asking something much more important. Can they change? Every investigation reaches a point where collecting more evidence no longer changes the outcome. it only confirms it. Let's review what we found. A child enters the world without opinions. Then, family, culture, language, and experience begin shaping the way that child understands reality. We then discovered that a room full of strangers can influence what an adult is willing to say, even when their own eyes disagree. After that, we found that simply watching another person's behavior can quietly become our own. No instructions required. And finally, we examined a mind that often reaches a conclusion before it explains the reason. None of these findings prove that you're incapable of thinking for yourself. They prove something far more valuable. The human mind is shaped before it becomes aware that it is being shaped. Which brings us back to the belief you chose at the beginning of this archive, the one you were certain belonged to you. Let's ask the same question again. Not is it true, but how did it arrive? Was it examined or inherited? Did you discover it, or did you simply grow up around it until it became invisible? Some beliefs survive investigation. Others survive only because they were never investigated. There is an important difference. The purpose of this archive was never to convince you that your thoughts aren't your own. That would simply replace one assumption with another. The purpose was to remind you that every belief deserves the same question. Where did you come from? Because the strongest beliefs aren't the ones we defend the loudest. They're the ones we forget to examine. So, what's the verdict? The evidence suggests that many of the thoughts we call ours were shaped long before we had the ability to question them. Not stolen, not implanted, shaped. And once we understand that, something remarkable happens. For the first time, we become capable of choosing which beliefs deserve to stay and which ones have simply stayed too long. This archive is now closed. The investigation is not. I'll see you in the next archive. Until then, keep questioning the evidence. Archive 001, sealed.